Hey, good people, how you doing? David Taub here, co-creator of NextLevelGuitar.com. What's up? Hope all is well, and I hope your guitar journeys are going famously. And today I have another issue of Guitar Gab. Students or players or whoever writes in, they put comments in these videos in the comment boxes on what they'd like to learn about, what they'd like to talk about it, and then I develop a video series on it. As you're watching this, you have any questions or you want to learn about a certain topic, certainly put a comment right below and I read all the comments, and who knows, maybe we'll do the topic that you pick and we'll send you a shout out. For instance, for this lesson where we're talking about all things guitar amps, I want to send a shout out to the Neo 1992. He wrote in and he said, hey, could we do a video on amplifiers, guitar amps, which ones, what to look for when buying one, the different types and styles out there, and what would be good for beginners and whatnot. So I want to thank the Neo 1992. Thank you so much for writing in. I want to do a very comprehensive video. This one's going to encompass lots of topics when we're talking about how to go about purchasing a guitar amp. So we're going to go very in depth in this, and hopefully you will find this inspiring and maybe learn a few things that will hopefully make your amp purchase a little bit easier, because it's a big deal, man. You know, your amp is, the amp that you choose is a big part of your sound, so it's pretty important. Pretty important. So, you know, it's tantamount that you are armed with the proper information. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by talking about just some broad things when it comes to amplifiers and sound, and then we're going to get into the heart of the matter. We're going to get into the nitty-gritty, where I'm going to talk about all the different things that you want to be aware of and what separates the different amps and why, and what to look for, and I'll even make some suggestions for some amps and things like that. But I think it's important first to start with a few broad topics when talking about what to look for in a guitar amp, when purchasing an amp, when trying to choose an amp, different amps. There's just so much stuff out there now. It's unbelievable. We live in such an exciting time, my friends, where there are so many choices available to us, so many great choices, and the technology just keeps getting better and better and better. And there's more and more manufacturers out there that are putting out great products that are just awesome sounding with killer features. It's a lot out there, so it's exciting, but at the same time it can be overwhelming, right? Because there's so many choices and so many different models, and it's impossible to play all the different ones at one or two or even three music stores, because music stores only carry a finite amount of manufacturers' amps, and you're not going to find everything in one amp store, right? So it's challenging, as well as there's just so much information out there and so many people doing reviews of different gear, like on YouTube. You could sit there literally. If there's any math majors out there, it'd be interesting to figure out, like, if you were to sit there and watch every possible video, you know, on amps, like how many years or decades would that be that you could be literally sitting watching amp videos or sound videos or tone videos? Just an absolute, almost an infinite amount of time, right, that you could spend. So you have to be careful you don't fall into that trap of just spending too much time, you know, watching videos. And you know what I always say, you do your research, you do your homework, but make a well-informed decision and then pull the trigger. You know what I'm saying, right? You got to make that decision and don't overanalyze. Some broad things I want to talk about amp purchasing and amps first. The first thing is, you know, buy the best you can afford. You really get what you pay for. And quality and craftsmanship is important in amps, especially if you're gigging out a lot. The amp is going to take a beating from transporting it and from playing it and cranking it up and moving it in rehearsals and whatnot. So you get what you pay for, like, you know, with most things in life. So buy the best you can afford. Another broad thing is, if you want a specific brand, get that brand. If you have to wait to save up for it, do it. What I mean by that is, if you really want a Marshall, if you love that Marshall tone, you really want a Marshall, get a Marshall. Don't go don't go out and get an amp that sounds like a Marshall, that's modeled after a Marshall. If that's what you really want, save up the little bit, extra bit, and get what you really want. Because in the end, if you get something that sounds like something else that's modeled after, you may not be happy. I always think if that's what you really want, get it. You deserve it, right? You know, our amp purchase is going to bring us years, decades, maybe a lifetime of joy that we're going to be using this. And if you're a working musician and you're making money, it's going to pay for itself. So it's important to make the right decision, spend the extra money, buy quality, and also you know, if that's what you want, get it. You deserve it. You work hard, go for it. And I'm going to talk about not just expensive boutique amps in this lesson. We'll hit on the beginner amps too, the cheaper bedroom practice amps. All amps are not created equal. And you know, what works for one person in their situation totally won't work for another person in their situation. They're all different. They all have different features that we're going to talk about, different tones for different playing applications, different types of music and genres tend to steer toward one amp. So they're not all created equal. And it's a very personal decision too, you know, what one person loves, another person may not love. And, you know, so when we talk about tone, we talk about amp sounds, it's very subjective. So I can't say this amp is better than this amp is better than this amp, because they all have positive features. And, you know, it's a very subjective thing. So you have to find out through your research and diligence and listening what sounds best to your ears, right? That's very important. Tone is subjective, and a large part of your tone really comes from what's in your hands and what's in your heart. I mean, let's face it. I mean, Eddie Van Halen can plug into any amp, use any guitar, and he's going to sound like Eddie Van Halen. You are not going to plug into an Eddie Van Halen amplifier and plug in and all of a sudden sound like Eddie Van Halen per se, right? A lot of it is in your hands and in your heart. Now, you can get close, certainly, you know, get in the ballpark using certain gear, but just be careful of that. You just don't necessarily want to buy a signature sounding amp because that's the exact tone you want of your favorite player, and then you get disappointed when you plug into it and you sound like you, right? So remember, you know, get close, do your due diligence. Tone, a lot of times, a lot of tone is really how you're, you know, how you're attacking the instrument, how you're hitting the strings, how you're bending the notes, your technique, and a lot of that goes into your tone. It's subjective for the most part, and I say for the most part because there are certain things that are just inarguable. I mean, who's going to argue that David Gilmour, you know, David Gilmour has great tone? There's no doubt about it. I don't think anyone could say, oh man, that guy's tone sucks, right? Great tone, you know. Some guys, just Stevie Ray Vaughan, great tone, right? No matter what they play through. Gary Moore, great tone, right? So we're chasing after it. We kind of have that in our mind, what we want. How do we go about getting it, right? The other thing I wanted to mention before we get into the specifics of what to look for and how to funnel your choices down to make it a little bit easier is I'm a firm believer in supporting your local communities and, you know, try to make your purchases in your local community, especially from mom and pop music stores if you can, or a local music store. That's a big deal. I think we're getting in this age of, you know, cyberspace and the age of technology, and you know, it's very easy just to go to a store, play something, okay, that's what I want, then go online and make the purchase to save a couple dollars. I can understand that. We're all budget conscious, but you know, the mom and pop music store is really disappearing, and it's a shame. And so I just want to say, if you can, I think it's important that we support our local communities, that we get out there and we spend money in our local communities, and not necessarily always just everything from just making purchases online. Just keep that in mind. The most important thing is, if you're overwhelmed or if you really don't know where to begin, is you have to funnel your choices down and look at a certain area of amplifier or a certain model of amplifier within a range. You can't look at everything because, like I said, amps are not created equal, and a lot of it depends on the application you want, and a lot of it depends on these other things that I'm going to talk about. And I've been getting a lot of emails, questions about that, and that's why I wanted to do a long lesson, very comprehensive on amplifier purchasing, kind of everything you've always wanted to know about amps but we're afraid to ask. But who can say everything, right? Or a lot of things, right? Okay, so a big thing is, let's funnel our choices down. And basically, I think you could funnel your choices down by looking at 6 different topics. 6 things, and we'll talk about them individually. But funnel your choices down by these 6. Function, budget, the type of amp, the features you want, that's 4, your tonal preferences, 5, and the type of music you play, right? So let's hit the easy ones first. Budget. Obviously, if you have a $300 budget, you don't want to go looking at $3,000 amps, right? Your budget right off the bat is going to narrow down the amount of choices that you're going to have for an amplifier. So have a budget in mind and stay within that budget. Don't start playing hugely expensive amps if you can't afford it, because it's just going to lead to an impulse purchase. The type of music you play, that's another easy one. Obviously, certain amplifiers are more geared toward playing certain styles of music. If you're, in a metal band, you may not want to get, a Roland Jazz chorus amp, or, a very clean Fender amp. A lot of metal guys, especially in today's modern metal player, they prefer things like, the Axe Effects, or they prefer things like a Mesa Boogie triple rectifier, or an EVH amp, right? Or whatnot, or a diesel. Those are very high gain amps, and those have the sounds and the features that particular genre of music really kind of puts you in that tonal ballpark. Now, that's not to say that you can't use any amp for any playing, because you can. There's really no rules. It all depends on what sounds best to your ears. But again, that could point you in the right direction. If you prefer the clean sounds, you might want to start looking at really clean sounding amps that take pedals well, because you can always add pedals, right? Choices for that would be like a nice Fender DeVille amp. That's some of my favorite sounding clean sounds. Some of the Fender amplifiers, and I'm talking tube amps, have that clean sound. If you like a more Voxy type British sound, like a Vox makes very nice clean sounding amps, which also distort well. Matchless has a really good Voxy kind of clean sound. I like the clean sound of my Mesa Boogie Mark II. Mesa Boogie has really great clean as well as distorted. So again, you want to look at the style of music you're playing, and that's going to help you funnel down the choices. Third thing is function. This is very important. What do you need the amp for? Do you need it for practicing in your bedroom at low volume? Do you need it for playing, small to mid-sized clubs? Do you need it for large venues outdoor? The function of the amplifier, what you need it for. Do you need an amp to play in rehearsal? So you got to be able to hear it over the drums, right? That, again, is going to point you in a certain direction. Again, we're trying to funnel down the choices to make things easier so you're not overwhelmed, right? Function's really important. And even within function, you have to be careful, because you don't need a 100-watt full stack to play in small to mid-sized clubs. I think 90% of the amp purchases out there, a combo, 212 amp will do for like 90% of places that most people are going to be playing. Those really high watt amps, I'm talking 100-watt amps and stacks. I mean, you're really never going to have that volume up that high to reach that amp's full potential to be using that, right? Unless you're playing, large, big clubs, arenas, outdoor shows, things like that. So you may not need that, 410 cabinet stack if you're just playing in your bedroom or in a rehearsal. You don't want to blow people off the stage, And the general trend for the last few years has been lower watts, 30, 40, 50 watt amps, right? I have one of my live rigs, I use a 35-watt amp. I don't think I've ever had the thing over 5 maybe at the most. And that's playing small to mid-sized clubs, and I play out a lot. Another one of my Fender amps, 60-watt Hot Rod DeVille, I haven't had the thing over 5, I don't think, in any situation. I've played some outdoor places. Again, so, bigger isn't necessarily better, right? So you don't want to think, I'll just get the biggest, the loudest. And 100 watts of this is not the same as 50 watts of that. A watt is not a watt per se when it comes to amps, right? So you want to do your homework on that. How much do you really need? Most of the time, if you're playing, small clubs, mid-sized clubs, 30, 40 watts is plenty. Whatnot, because in a lot of instances, you're going to be miking it, and it's going to be running through the PA, right? So you don't need all that power. The PA is going to be driving in. In fact, you're going to want to keep the stage volume low, unless you need to move air and you're playing a bigger room or outdoors or something. But for the most part, you got to keep the stage volume a little lower and let the guys out front mix the sound. As far as rehearsal amps, if you just need something with enough power to be heard over the drums, but you don't want it to take over the sound of the whole band, so you can't get any work done because all anybody hears is your guitar. So the function, what you need the amp for, right? The type of music you play, your budget, right? 3 things already that are really going to narrow those choices down. And when we're talking about budget, I've been getting emails about, can I recommend inexpensive practice amps for the bedroom and whatnot. They're making a lot of really killer inexpensive practice amps that have lots of features. They're easy to use and they sound great at low volumes, right? Which is awesome. We live in such exciting times, like I was saying, my friend. These choices weren't available, all these choices, when I was first learning guitar. But I wrote down some that I really have messed with, that I've heard, that I've played through, and they sound really good. So if you're looking for that practice amp or that bedroom amp, check out the Yamaha THR line. Really good sounding amps. Roland Cube, a lot of good sounds you can get out of that Roland Cube amp. Fender Mustang, that orange Micro Terror, good sounding amp. The Vox Valvetronics, PV Viper, the VIP series. They're making some cool stuff. Man, some great sounds out of that amp. Blackstar. Blackstar has really been stepping up their game, making some cool stuff. I believe their series of the small amps that sound good are the ID series. So make sure you check those out. Amps at great value with great sounds for bedroom use or low volume use. The amp type. This is again going to narrow down your focus, narrow down the decision-making process, right? And basically we're talking 4 types of amps basically that are on the market today. There's your tube amps, there's your solid state or transistor amps, there's your hybrid amps, and then there's your modeling amps, which use the digital processors, the software to model sounds after certain other amps, right? So I'm not going to get into a big debate over one being better than other. Again, it all depends on what sounds best to your ears. If you want to know my preference, I prefer tube amps. To me, they just work. I love the way they respond to your playing. I just love the way they sound. They have that tube warmth, a little bit more organic sound, a little bit warmer sound to my ears. But the solid state amps, they have made such incredible advances in over the last years and years that they're making them pretty good. I can give you the pros and cons of these, but I'm not going to say one's better than the other. It all depends on you. I keep saying that. It's so important. You got to find what you like. So the solid state amp or the transistor amp, that uses transistors for the preamp and the power amp section, whereas the tube amps using vacuum tubes or valves, what they call, some might call valves, to run the preamp and the power amp sections. The hybrid amps kind of use that basic tube circuitry for the most of the time for the preamps, but then the power amps are solid state, so it's kind of like a mix of both. You get the positives of both sides. And then, like I said, the modeling amps or those use the digital processors to simulate the sound and the software. And some of those today, I mean, my God, you could just plug into your computer or plug into an interface into your computer and get some amazing, amazing sounds with no latency or delay. Incredible. So pros and cons a little bit to help you drive your choice. The tube amps generally are more expensive, right? Solid state amps are cheaper. Tube amps require maintenance. The tubes have to be replaced regularly, and the amp would have to be, maintained more. You have to set the idle speed unless it's a cathode-based amp. So you'd have to bring it in for service. They're heavier, right? Which may not seem like a big deal, but if you're a gigging musician, man, it gets tiring. I play out a lot, and I'll tell you, man, it gets tiring lugging around, heavy amps all the time. I do it because I love the tube sound, but it gets to be a hassle. And if you think, man, stacks and stacks of 412 cabinets on stage look so cool, wait till you start having to haul them around, because they're not going to fit into your, your Mini Cooper, so you're going to have to get special transportation for them. And as well as, man, lug them around to a bunch of shows and you'll find it gets old pretty quick, right? So they're heavier, they require more maintenance, tube amps do. They're more expensive. Solid state amps are generally cheaper. Tube amps, the other thing is generally you got to really get them cranking. You have to get those tubes hot. You got to crank up the volume. They don't sound as good at low volume because you got to get those tubes talking to each other, right? And you got to get them really, really hot and firing for them to distort and to drive them. You need a lot of signal. So solid state amps will sound better at lower volume. They're lighter, easier to transport, cheaper is the solid state route. Something to consider, especially if you're on a budget, right? The hybrid amps, there's a lot of good ones on the market. Again, if you want kind of the benefit of having that warmer tube sound, but maybe having some of the features of the solid state amp, good way to go. The modeling amps using the software are getting incredibly popular, especially stuff that you can hook up to your computer, and especially things like the Axe effects A lot of the big name players are using those. A lot of times they love the sounds and all the variety of sounds it can get. And the consistency, I think, is a big deal, because when you're playing at that level, lots of different venues, indoor, outdoor, there's a lot, every room sounds different, right? When you start moving the air through the speakers and through the tubes and whatnot, and you get a real consistent sound using those same settings every night. So basically, those are the different types of amps, so decide on what sounds best to your ears. If you want a tube amp and you don't mind the extra costs and the maintenance, go for it. There's tons and tons of great ones out there on the market today, made by all kinds of companies. Like I said, depending on the sounds that you like, go play them all. Play as many amps as you can get your hands on. And here's a big deal: bring your guitar to the music store. Don't play through another guitar. You want to get the true sound, your guitar, your pickups. Bring your guitar to the music store and play through everything they've got, and try it. Try some Fender tube amps. If you like that British sound, go with the Marshalls, some Foxes, Orange amps. You have that British sound. Or if you like that American modern sound, you know, try some Mesa Boogies or some of the Paul Reed Smith amps. They're making some cool stuff. Also, Suhr is making not only some great guitars, but some killer sounding amps. A little bit more expensive though, and you could get a great sounding clean amp. A lot of times I see guys trying to mask the sound of their amp with pedals, rows and rows of pedals, and just getting totally carried away with pedals. And I'm not a big believer in that. I personally believe in starting with a great clean sound, if that's the route you want to go, and then add pedals to the amp to enhance it. You know what I mean? Sometimes I go see a lot of bands live, and sometimes I'll see guys, they'll have so many pedals, just rows and rows and lined up multiple pedal boards, and their tone will still be crappy. Be like, ooh, yuck, right? And it baffles my mind, because they keep adding more pedals. Right? That's not the answer. The answer is start off with a great sounding amp. And I like using the distortion for the most part. Personally, I like tube amps that have great sounding clean sounds, and that you can also get a great sounding distorted sound if possible. Sometimes it's tough to find one amp that has everything, but I love the distorted sound coming from the amp itself. And then you can enhance it by adding stuff. But you're starting with that good bass. You're not gonna take, you know, a total turd amp and turn it into this great sounding amp from adding pedals. You could improve it, yes, but in the end, start off with a great sounding amp that you're happy and comfortable with, and then go from there. So now you're funneling your choices down by type of amp. And then as long as you're on type of amp, let's talk about another thing that will really funnel your choices, is the features of the amp. This is critical too, because it will really drive the price. Some of the features: do you want an amp that has just one channel, meaning it has one basic sound? A lot of times it's a clean amp, that's it, and then you add pedals to it, and then you could get your distorted sound, and you could add a booster pedal to it, so when you solo, you could step on that, bring up the volume for your solos, right? A lot of guys like that route. A lot of really great sounding clean amps that take pedals well, like a Fender amp. Fender, real good sounding DeVille tube clean amp. Great clean sound. A lot of times the distorted sound that some Fenders have, a lot of people not a huge fan of that. That's okay. You can add some pedals because they make some killer pedals, but just have a start with a great clean sounding amp. If you like, again, a more British sound, Vox, great clean sounding amp. So do you want an amp with one channel, or an amp with two channels, which a lot of times will have a clean sound and a distorted sound? Some amps have three channels. A lot of time it'll be a clean sound, a distorted one, and a distorted two, like more distortion, or a clean overdrive and distortion. Some amp have four channels. How many channels do you really need? Now remember, as you start adding channels, a couple things happen. One, the price starts going up. That's more internal gear components to make that whole thing run. It's going to be more expensive. The other thing is, do you want each channel to have its own EQ? EQ meaning a treble, mid, and bass controls for each channel. Sometimes you might have a multiple channel amp, but they share an EQ. That's tough. Like, I have a Mesa Boogie Mark II, which I love. The only thing with it that I don't like is that it shares the EQ with the clean channel and distorted channel. So I get it set to my fantastic killer distorted sound. If I change to the clean sound, it's way off, and it wouldn't be the same clean sound as if I was just dial up a clean sound. So what I do a lot with that amp is to clean up the sound, I just turn the volume down on the distorted channel when I'm playing, and that cleans it up. So once you start adding a separate EQ to each channel, again, raises the price up. Some people just like the sound of one channel amps. The amp is just focused on that one channel. I like 2-channel amps or 3-channel amps. I like having that option, and I could just click, 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 because I play out a lot live, click to the second, click to the third. I have those options there. Again, it's tough to find an amp, I found, that has, you know, unbelievably awesome clean sound and unbelievable awesome distortion sound and lead sound. That's tough to have to find one amp that does everything incredibly well. A lot of times that's where you have to compromise a little bit. Other features of the amps: get one with an effects loop, right? That's pretty important, because if you're running effects, you want to run them through that effects loop. You don't want to have them out front per se. Again, there's no rules, and you could hook up some things to the front of the amp that would sound good, but generally certain effects sound better through the effects loop, like a digital delay or an analog delay. You're going to run that through the effects loop most of the time. So having the effects loop is important. That's an important feature. Will drive up the price. Do you want the amp to have built-in reverb, right? Or not, then you might get a separate reverb pedal. Reverb really adds a little bit of, you know, a little bit of that extra sound, that extra delay, that extra niceness to your sound, that little bit of that echo. It's nice to have. And some amps have really good, you know, spring reverb. Some amps have nice tube reverb. Some have tank reverb. In some instances, that tube reverb in that amp is a complex circuitry, so that might add another couple $100 to the amp. So the features are very important as far as that are going to be driving the price, and you need to know. Some amplifiers in the lower price ranges sometimes have built-in effects. Do you want that? Do you want an amp that has the delay and flange and a bunch of other effects built into the amp, right? If you do, there's amps out there that have that. But know that for the most part, you're not going to have as much control over that as if you have a separate pedal with, you know, more controls over. Basically, a lot of times when it's just in the amp, the effects, you would basically, okay, is it on, off, and maybe you control the speed a little bit, but you're not going to get the amount of control as if you would with a big floor pedal box, right? A big foot pedal box, I mean, a stomp box. So, but again, if you're just playing in your bedroom and you want some effect, it's convenient, you know, and if they sound good. So do you want the amp to have onboard effects? Do you want your amplifier to have a separate EQ with it, right? Some have built-in graphic EQs along with your bass, mids, and treble, which are pretty cool. So you can really kind of shape the frequencies of the sounds, right? So the best way is go to the store and start fooling around and twisting knobs and getting out there with your guitar and seeing what features you really want in an amp. Some other features that I like in some of the amps today are some of the tube amps have power kickdown switches, which is a really nice feature. So for instance, if it's a 50-watt amp, you might be able to run it at 10 watts and 30 watts. Usually it's like 7 watts and 21 watts. I don't know how they come up with these oddball number figures, but usually that's what it is. Or full blast, so that's nice. So you could play the amp at lower volume and it still sound great. So that power kind of attenuating is a really cool feature. I use that a lot with some of my amps if they have that. Another feature for an amp that's nice, especially if you're using an amp with different cabinets, is being able to change the impedance for the speakers, which I'll talk about in a minute. But you know, you have to, if you have an amp and speaker, you have to make sure that they match, or you could really damage the speakers. So a lot of times it's 4, 8, or 16 ohms, and a lot of the amps, especially the higher end separate heads, have that capability. So you could run it through a 4 ohm, an 8 ohm, or 16 ohm cabinet. So that's a nice feature to have. So really do your homework and really check the features of these amps to make sure they're dialed into what you need them for. Another choice you can narrow it down by is your tonal preferences. You know, you probably are watching a lot of YouTube videos, right? And listening to different people play the amp. Again, like I said in the beginning, just be careful with that, because a lot of times, you know, someone playing the amp, you know, you might not sound exactly like that, but you can get an idea of the amp and its features. That's what it's good to watch for, is a lot of times the good reviews, they'll go over the features of the amp, and you can get a ballpark idea of what the amp sounds like, you know, and then you go play it for yourself and you really see if that's the one. And again, it's a very personal choice. So be informed, just don't overanalyze. You know, like I said, you could sit there literally for years and watch gear reviews on all the different amps, right? But, you know, in the end, you know, you have to draw the line and be like, okay, this is my tone. This is it. Now let's spend more time playing and practicing, right? So you got to find that balance between, being a gearhead like we all are and being a tone chaser like most of us guitar players, and balancing that with, hey, this is it. I got to put time into my playing, time into my songwriting, time into studying. Okay, and maybe a little bit less of the watching of the gear videos. Another thing to funnel your choices, and this kind of falls under the types of amps, is the configuration of the amp. And what I mean by that is the amp a combo amp or a separate head and cabinet? What a combo amp is, it's all in one. It has the amp chassis and the speakers built into one cabinet, and you just grab that. And most players play with just that, with combo amps. And combo amps, probably most of the guitar amp purchases out there, they're for combo amps. And probably a 212, that's with two 12-inch speakers, will do justice for just about most playing situations for most players, if you're playing live even. So the configuration is important. They also make 112 combo amps. They make combo amps with different size speakers, like a 10-inch speaker and a 12-inch speaker. And I'll talk about speakers in a minute too. That's another important feature. So do you want to have a separate head and cabinet, or do you want it all in once? The big thing with the combo amp is it's very convenient. Just grab it, you got everything. When you're dealing with the separate head and cabinet, there's more things to carry. Usually it's going to be more work. But the good thing is you can use different speakers, right? You could try different cabinets, different speakers, different size speakers, different wattage speakers, and really dial in your sound a little bit more with the separate head and cabinet. So it's a matter of, what you're looking for, what works best for you. I'd say probably 90% of the amp purchases out there are probably combo amps. But again, if you're playing larger venues where you need to move air, you're going to need more speakers. You're going to want to get, then you start getting into like 412 cabinets and things like that. But most players probably are going with the combo amps. Your speaker choice, what speakers are in the cabinet is important, because certain speakers sound a little bit differently. Most guitar amplifiers, or even most cabinets, are 12-inch speakers. That's probably the size of choice. But often probably the second most used are the 10-inch speakers. And the 12-inch speakers, basically, you get a little bit more bass. 10-inch speakers, less bass and a little tighter sounding. So again, it all depends on the sound that you're going for. I like the little bassier sound. I generally prefer a 12-inch speaker, but play them both. See what sounds best to your ears. The other thing is the wattage of the speaker, right? And if you're a rock player, most of the time, in most given situations, rock guys like 25-watt speakers, because it doesn't take as much to distort them as it would like a 100-watt speaker. I don't even know why most people, you'd be using 100-watt speakers anyway, right? Because think about it. Are you ever going to have your amp up loud enough that's going to be driving a 100-watt speaker and trying to get that to distort, right? I don't know. Probably not, right? So that's why generally in most rock and even blues rock communities, like 25-watt speakers, 30-watt speakers, 35-watt speakers, generally those are the speaker of choice, because it doesn't take as much signal to get them to distort as like a 75-watt or a 100-watt speaker. Those low wattage speakers, they're just easier to overdrive. So you can get that great overdriven sound, that sweet tone at more reasonable volume, right? Again, the big thing is to really funnel down your choices. Don't be overwhelmed. Do your due diligence, but then, make that well-informed decision and pull the trigger. Funnel your choices down by function, by budget, by the type of amp, by the features you want, by the tonal preferences of your choice, what sounds best to your ears, and the type of music that you play. And, buy quality. If you can, buy from a mom and pop store, or maybe in your local community at a guitar store or music store, right? And really road test them. Get out there, bring your guitar, twist lots of knobs, right? Watch videos and gear reviews and listen for the features of the amp. That's so important. And, and enjoy the journey and enjoy the process, because that's what this is all about, right? We want to have fun with our instruments, fun with our amps. It's a big part of our sound. And I hope this video has helped you and I hope it will help you in your decision-making process and give you a little bit more information, so you'll be armed to make that well-informed decision, because there's a lot of stuff out there. It's overwhelming and a lot of information out there, right? So I kind of you know, hopefully was able to pull from my experiences and knowledge, and hopefully be able to help you to make a well-informed decision that you'll be happy with, and that you won't have buyer's remorse, and you'll be able to, because we want our amps to inspire us, and we're playing through them and just listen to those sweet sounds, man. What's better than that? We get that amp dialed in and it's working, and man, and we're playing and it sounds so good. It's so motivating. It's so much more inspiring and empowering. Life is too short to play through crappy sounding amps, right? So hey, I want to wish you the best in your guitar journey. Please, if you like this video, please hit the like button. Please subscribe to the channel. That's very important. I got new stuff coming out all the time. I'll let you know. Got all kinds of lessons too for all level players, all genres of music here at Rock On Good People, our YouTube channel. So subscribe to the channel. Please hit the like button. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you want to hear about, what you want to learn about in these Guitar Gab sessions, because that's where I'm picking content from you, the viewers, right? Write in, let us know what you want to hear about, what you want us to talk about, what you want to learn about. And I want to thank you so much for watching, and thank you for your support. If you have any questions, you could always email us at thenextlevelguitar@yahoo.com. We are here to help. We have all kinds of DVD and instructional products and downloadable digital download series and products that could really help you along in your guitar journey. All genres of music, all levels, beginners, intermediates, advanced, right? We try to cover all the bases. So let me know what you're looking for or what you want to learn. I might be able to, you know, direct you toward the appropriate DVD for your level, right? We're here to help. Thanks again. Keep putting those guitars in your hands every day. Make well-informed decisions, pull those triggers, have fun, and keep on rocking. And remember, your playing is an evolution. Rock on.